Okay, we're up to over 50 now have joined. So let's please start our formal considerations here today. So everyone, good afternoon and welcome to today's PRF webinar. I've really been looking forward to this ever since it's been in my calendar. So I'm really grateful that you're able to join us here today. I am joining from the beautiful lands of the Gadigal people, and I'd like to acknowledge their elders, past, present, and the emerging leaders across that we have. I am so thankful that as a Gomeroi woman, I get to play and work and stay on these lands. And I'd like to extend that respect and acknowledgement to both my elders, past and present, but also to all of you who are joining today from various areas across the country. Just a very, very quick couple of two key points in relation to housekeeping. We've muted the microphones and cameras so we can make the most of our time together, so we can concentrate and enable our events team behind the scene to be able to do this. But you will be able to interact using the chat as well as the Q&A functions if you have it. And we would honestly love to hear from you. The first ones that we'd love to hear from is what country you're joining from and the beautiful lands in which you are here today. So please jump into it straight away. We're also recording the session, and the link to this will all be shared with everyone who is registered afterwards. Okay, great. Now that that's formally done, I am Michelle Steele. As I said, I'm a Kamilaroi woman from Moree, New South Wales. That's where my mum, my grandmother, great-grandmother, and all those beautiful matriarchs before her are from. But today here, we're actually here for a particular reason. It actually centres on a report by our 2024 PRF Fellow and First Nations AI founder, Dr. Kyle Turner, exploring how artificial intelligence can shape the future for First Nations communities in Australia. The report and the research examines how AI could either widen inequality or help close the gap, depending on who is shaping the technologies. Dr. Turner, Kyle, report systematically reviews Australia's 17 closing the gap targets, looking at how AI may impact areas such as health, education, justice, employment, and culture. While the technology could improve lives, we also understand that it also to highlight significant risks, especially when communities are excluded from its design and governance. I am so delighted to have Kyle here with us alongside two other great panel members as well, but we'll introduce them later. So for first and foremost, what I would like to do is hand over to Kyle to present to you his research findings. Thank you, Kyle.
Thanks, Shell. Can you hear me clearly? I can see you, so all good. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I've been really looking forward to this. And thanks to PRF for hosting us today. As Shell said, I'll just introduce myself briefly. My name is Kyle. I'm a Wiradjuri man, originally from central New South Wales in Dubbo. And I'm joining you today, though, from Wurundjeri country here in or Melbourne. All right, so we've got 14 slides today. I always like to know where I'm going. And I want to start by being really clear about why I'm here and why I spent 12 months writing a 50-page report on the future impact of AI on First Nations communities. So I've spent the last 15 to 20 years working in public health. I'm an epidemiologist, and with First Nation communities all over Australia. But I also spent 5 years as an AI founder. I built a company from the ground up here in I'll refer to that case study later. So on one side, I know the potential of these tools because I've coded them. But on the other side, I'm also acutely aware of the deep systemic failures of our current service environments because I've worked in them. Historically, First Nations people have been the last to benefit from advances in medicine, technology, education, and my worry, and the reason why I did the PRF fellowship, is that if we don't get the governance right now, AI will simply become another vector for extraction and control. So while I am an optimist about AI, I am a conditional optimist. I believe AI and automation will help close the gaps. It can, but only if we work together to ensure First Nations leadership is at the centre of the design brief, not added on as an afterthought. The consequences of getting this wrong are far too great, and the work starts with all of us here taking control of our relationship with this emerging technology. All right, so let me start by asking you all two questions. You don't need to answer out loud or raise your hands. Just think about your reaction, your answer in your mind. One, do you feel like AI is moving so fast that governments, regulators, and institutions can't keep up with it? Two, has the speed and potential of AI ever felt overwhelming? If the answer is yes to either of those questions, that is completely understandable. Every week, there's a new headline, a new model, a breakthrough. And to me, it's often felt like a weather event, something happening to me that I have no control over. And for many people, this creates a sense of inevitability that leads to either passive excitement or often paralysis, decision-making paralysis, less engagement in the new technologies. So there's a critical distinction, that I want to make today. Yes, AI development is happening rapidly, super fast, it's messy, it's chaotic. But AI deployment, not development, the part that actually touches your lives, your organizations, your data, that deployment is almost always slow, negotiated, shaped by very ordinary, boring human decisions. Take robo-debt as a prime example. As you probably remember, robo-debt was an automated debt recovery scheme that used flawed data matching to incorrectly accuse hundreds of thousands of Australians, welfare recipients, that they owed money to the government. The system caused enormous tragic harm to thousands of people, but this wasn't an AI failure. It was a policy failure. It was a failure of governance, a failure of human accountability. And the damage didn't come from a rogue algorithm. It came from how automation was used to replace human judgment in a system that really already lacked transparency. So in general, AI works that way. These tools don't just arrive out of the sky. They arrive when a department buys a new tool, when a manager approves a new workflow using AI, or when a policy allows a system to start influencing decisions. So if you take one idea from today, please let it be this. As the headline says, AI outcomes are governable. Right, so if we accept AI outcomes are governable, and I hope you do, the next question is who is doing the governing? I'm going to spend the rest of my talk zooming in on the First Nations context. That's what I care about. But to do that properly, I first need to paint you a broader picture of the Australian AI landscape that we're all operating in. So right now, that landscape to me is a paradox. On one hand, you have the Australian government moving quite fast. In December, the government released our first ever national AI plan, and it's heavily focused on sovereign compute, essentially building our own massive data centers so we aren't dependent on overseas tech companies. And the government is doubly, right now, they're pushing AI into every corner of the public service, from health to border security. So that's happening. But on the other hand, the Australian government has decided not to pass a standalone AI Act. Unlike Europe, we don't have a single piece of legislation that puts mandatory guardrails around high-risk AI. Instead, the government is relying on you. And they've given us a light touch approach using existing privacy and consumer laws to manage that risk. So what does that mean for all of us on the call? There is no central referee coming to save us. There is no safety switch. The burden of ensuring these tools are safe, fair, culturally appropriate falls directly on you and on your organisations and the communities that choose to deploy them. So because the national regulation is thin, your governance has to be thick We can't wait for policies or law from Canberra to protect our interests. We have to be the ones that set the terms. And this all starts with how you handle one of your most valuable assets, your data. Sip water. Hopefully everyone can hear me all right. So if we have to set the terms ourselves, what levers can we pull? For First Nations people, that lever is Indigenous Data Sovereignty, or IDS. IDS is the right for our communities to control, access, govern data that is about us. It is not a cultural awareness exercise or a compliance tick box. It is a practical power. Without IDS, our fancy new national AI plan would just push data, and it would become a new form of colonialism in my mind, like data colonialism, where our information is extracted and commodified without our consent or benefit. Fortunately, some good news, the National AI Plan has explicitly recognised IDS as a requirement for any trusted AI system. So you now have a formal policy backing to say to any vendor or government department, if we don't own the data, if we don't have the right to say no, then this project does not move forward. Data is not the whole story. I want to also quickly mention ICIP, or Indigenous Cultural and Intellectual Property. If IDS is about the container of the data, ICIP is like the soul of the data. It's about protecting traditional knowledge systems, our stories, our cultural expressions, stopping them from being swallowed up by AI models. And we're already seeing the risks here. It's coming around pretty quick. And I'll give you a few examples. So one, style extraction. Generative AI tools are being trained on Indigenous art, allowing anyone to produce authentic Aboriginal art at the click of a button without a cent going back to the artist. Another one is sacred stories. Large language models are being fed oral histories and sacred knowledge that were never meant for public or commercial use, effectively selling our own culture back to us in a black box. And the last one is identity theft. You might have seen this image or the headlines. This just happened just a few weeks ago that I've got up on the screen. This Aboriginal man on your screen is not real. He is a digital puppet created by an algorithm and a bloke in New Zealand, a white fella, with zero connection to country or community. And last, but this is not just a fake photo. It is a direct violation of culture, identity, and it's happening without anyone's consent. It's a little bit of a tangent, but I have to quickly talk to you about where all this data actually lives. Because we often talk about data in the cloud as if it's this invisible, weightless thing. But AI is a heavy industrial process. It leaves a massive physical footprint. To give you an idea of that, right now, data centers in Australia consume about 5% of our total national electricity. By 2030, in 4 years, that's expected to triple. These centres also require millions of litres of water every single day for cooling. Water that is drawn from the catchments of the very lands First Nations people have cared for millennia. So now you might feel like that is out of your hands, but it isn't. This is a practical choice for every organisation to make. Every time you choose a new tool, you are also choosing a footprint. On one hand, you have the massive black box models that drain power, enormous power and water. On the other hand, and this is emerging quickly, you have the option for smaller, more specialized AI that can be hosted locally within your organization. So with AI, bigger is not always better. And in the First Nations context, sovereign is better. if the technology isn't sustainable for the country it sits on, then it might not be the right fit for you or your organization. So when you're looking at your next tech stack, ask yourself, where is this plugged in and what is the environmental price you're willing to pay? All right, and another important point that we all have to accept is that AI is not landing on a level playing field. It doesn't come from nowhere or start from scratch. AI layers itself on top of the systems we already have. And if those systems are unequal, the AI will simply automate and accelerate that inequality. For example, I'm going to give you 3 structural barriers that must be addressed alongside following IDS and ICIP principles. So first is the digital divide. If you haven't looked this up, look up the digital divide, please. It's quite shocking. People can't talk about AI as a tool for equity. They can often talk about AI as a tool for equity. But in remote communities today, digital inclusion for First Nations people is effectively half of that of the non-Indigenous population. So right now, someone in Sydney could be using AI to streamline their business on a high-speed connection, while at the same time, a First Nations family living out back is struggling to even load a basic government website. That's the reality we live in today. Second, another example is algorithmic bias. AI is a mirror. It's not a judge. It learns from historical data. If you feed it 200 years of data from a justice system or a health system that has consistently produced unequal outcomes, then the AI won't fix these biases. It will perfect them. It will make the inequalities more efficient and even harder to see. Third is data colonialism, which I talked about earlier. Data is like the new gold rush. It's the extraction of our stories, our health records, our traditional knowledge systems, and our data is being used to train models owned by billion-dollar companies with zero benefit flowing back to our communities. So those are just a few examples of the structural barriers we're up against that you must take into consideration. But my point is, because these types of barriers exist, we cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach to AI. We have to triage. We have to decide where we accelerate, where we adapt, where we must stop entirely. Sorry, I'm losing my breath. I should turn the aircon on. Okay, we're up to slide 8 out of 14. Now, I don't assume that you've all had the time to read the full report. It's pretty long, but if you do want to read it, you can go to this website and download a copy. At the heart of my research, I looked at the risks and opportunities of AI against all of the 17 close the gap outcome targets. And I asked a simple question for each target. Will this technology move us closer to or further away from each target? And what I found was another uneven landscape. AI isn't going to land the same way in a health clinic as it will in a courtroom. Right now, the impact will be different depending on the domain. So we can't just have a one-speed strategy for AI. We have to move at different speeds depending on what is at stake. All right, I like to start with the good news, the positives. And I'll start with areas where we can put the foot on the gas, where we can accelerate. These are the spots where the evidence shows that AI has clear potential to improve access and strengthen what is already working. In these domains, the technology isn't trying to replace First Nations people. It acts as a force multiplier for the work we are already doing, particularly the work we're doing well. I'll just give you 2 examples from my research that I really just loved. On the left, it comes out of the Kimberley and Kakadu, where First Nations park rangers are pairing their traditional ecological knowledge with computer vision, a branch of AI, to monitor wildlife as well as manage fire risk. They're using a tool called Mega Detector to scan tens of thousands of sensor camera images. And now, instead of a person sitting in an office for weeks, which I did years ago, looking at empty photos of grass, the AI is doing the boring part for them and flagging the endangered animals, the areas that are under fire threat. So thanks to AI, our rangers are spending more time out on country and with a lot more useful information. So on the right is another example using AI speech technology. So mainstream tools can sometimes struggle to understand the way mob talk. But here we have on Noongar country in Perth, the Yarning Corpus project. And they've built models under strict community protocols that can now recognise the local Aboriginal English. And doctors in the area have started using the model to take better notes during clinic and to communicate better with their First Nations patients. So the themes in these domains are pretty simple. When First Nations communities set the brief, control the data, the technology amplifies the work. First Nations people are not just adopting AI, they're leading it. Right, just briefly, I don't know if anyone knows me on the call, but this is what I did for 5 years. I ran a dental AI startup, and I just wanted to share this example. So in 2019, I founded Pearly. I started it because I was looking at a massive gap in dental health in Australia, and just something I'd seen firsthand in public health. And recently I spent a fortune on fixing my teeth. I'm going to embarrass myself and just show my new pearly whites. But they were pretty awful up until recently. They were crooked, rotten. I had a couple of teeth missing, and it was pretty horrible. And it's fully preventable. Oral diseases, but essentially is with regular checkups and good oral health. But I grew up in a very poor and rural part of Australia where dentistry was almost entirely out of reach. And that's the case for a lot of First Nations people. Getting to a dentist is a bloody nightmare. It's either too expensive or you're living hundreds of kilometers away from the nearest clinic. And so I was familiar with computer vision. And so I built a smartphone app, it feels like a lifetime ago, where we used computer vision, a branch of AI, to scan dental photographs. So essentially you'd grab your phone, download our app, and you'd take pictures of your teeth and your gums, and the AI would check for things like tooth decay, gum disease, and then give you a tailored oral health plan to improve your oral health behaviors. It all took about 5 minutes. It was completely free. So this wasn't about me trying to replace dentists. It was about filling the holes in a broken system, an uneven landscape, helping people who were never going to walk into a dental clinic anyway. And we ended up providing over 200,000 free dental checkups around the world because we had access to this technology. So hopefully the point of that was you see this as an example of how AI, when done right, it can really help a lot of people. Okay, get to the second speed. That accelerates, and now this is the murky one, adapt. It isn't all clear skies. Once we move out of those specific community-led projects, the ground starts to feel a lot more fragile. These are in areas like employment and housing. There is clearly potential here. AI could help match our young people to jobs or triage urgent repairs in remote housing. But these tools are almost always built on top of historical data that already carries the marks of inequality. Taking employment as an example. Many organizations now are using AI to screen resumes. But if that algorithm learns from 20 years, 30 years of hiring data from companies that never hired a First Nations person, the AI just becomes a high-speed gatekeeper that learnt to exclude First Nations people before they even get a chance to interview. Similarly, in the same risk I'm seeing in housing, you can read the report if you want more information. AI could be used to model better community layouts or allocate community housing, but it can also be used to screen out high-risk tenants based on biased metrics. So in these types of domains, even though there is clear potential to do good, we just can't plug and play. We have to adapt the technology first and set higher standards, add safeguards. And this means demanding full transparency on how decisions are made, ensuring we have the right to appeal any automated decision, and most importantly, making sure a human being, not an algorithm, is involved somewhere in that decision-making process. Right, so if accelerate is the green light, adapt is the yellow light, then there are some domains where we simply have to hit the brakes, and I've labeled this the pause category. I'm talking specifically about the criminal justice system, child protection, domains like this. These are systems where trust isn't just low. For many First Nations families, trust in these systems is non-existent. When people talk about predictive policing or risk assessments in child protection, you have to be brutally honest about the data used to train those models. If you fed an algorithm data that comes from decades of over-policing and systemic bias, then you're not getting a neutral outcome. It's just speeding up the injustice. And then we get, when we get a system that labels First Nations kids as high risk before they've even done anything wrong. That's confusing safety with surveillance. So in these types of domains, it's clear as day, you cannot afford to move fast and break things. That's the wrong attitude. Because if these systems break, they break families and they break futures. The risks are just far too high. So until we have total transparency in these types of domains, until First Nations governance is at the very center of their design briefs, and until we have the power to say no, the only ethical stance for these domains is stop, pause, no, not yet. And leaders in these domains have to be brave enough to say that just because the technology can do something, it doesn't mean it should, especially when the cost is paid by some of our country's most vulnerable people. We're nearly done. Okay, so we're about to move into our panel discussion. I'm really looking forward to getting your questions, so please start thinking about them or chucking them in the chat. Along with Professor Peter Radoll, we're also very lucky to have Dr. Kristen Moeller-Saxone from Infoxchange. It's a company I really admire. If you haven't heard of them, please look them up. Infoxchange, they're basically the gold standard for digital inclusion in this country. And Kristen leads their Data Catalyst network. It's a massive collaboration focused on lifting the data capability of the not-for-profit sector. And so Kristen understands better than almost anyone that technology is only as good as the community's ability to actually use it. And that for tech to be a tool for social justice, it has to be built on a foundation of equality. Right, so now to wrap up the how-to part of this webinar, I want to give you 3 quick takeaways to keep in mind as we head into the panel. First, more funding. You can't build a digital future on a dial-up connection. If you're a funder on this call or a policymaker, please don't just look at the shiniest new tool or system. Look at the foundation, the connectivity, the affordability, and the digital skills needed to make sure First Nations people are not left behind. We need to close the digital divide. Second, use your contracts. Consultation is a weak lever. If you want real governance, use a termination for cultural misalignment clause in your contracts. It's a simple legal tool that gives First Nation leaders the power to pull the plug if a project stops serving the community. And third, set the brief from day one. Don't come to First Nations people with a finished product. We need to be the ones defining the problem and setting the boundaries before any code is written. If we all start implementing these types of strategies, First Nations people stop being the subjects of someone else's code. We move from being passive observers to being the ones actually holding the steering wheel. All right, I couldn't leave without a quick plug. Another one, sorry. Just prior to Christmas, I've been a lot of people have reached out who've read the report, and it's fantastic. But one of those was the Vice Chancellor of Victoria University, Adam Shoemaker, and he'd read the report, and he reached out and he wanted to get a coffee, and he's wanted to know what I wanted to do next. And I said, I want to run pilots with First Nation organisations. I want to scope and co-design AI solutions, follow IDS principles, document the whole process so that it becomes a bit of a beacon for everyone else to learn from and follow. Anyway, he loved that. So he's given me a 5-year fellowship at VU. And over the next few years, I'm going to try and set up Australia's First Nations AI Institute. But to do that, I need partners. I need help. So if you're on this call and you're interested in collaborating or want to help in some way, please reach out on LinkedIn. I'll add my email in the chat. Or you can be a researcher, but you can also be a First Nations organisation that wants to be part of these pilots. Anyway, that's it. Thank you so much for your time. Shell, back to you.
Thank you so much. And I know that you can't hear it, but I am absolutely sure that there is a bunch of a round of applauses. I've seen lots of emojis coming through on the reaction buttons from people, and, engagement through the chat and that as well. So thank you so much as well. And actually, I just seen a very common name of one of my fellow countrywomen's name just pop up actually on the so welcome to everyone who has sat through this. You probably now know why, as well, from hearing from Kyle, why I thought this report was one of the best things I've ever read, because it's not only just about the initial elements about AI, but it's all those intricacies associated with that. It's about the impact on the environment and the care for country. And we've seen lots of information coming through on that on the chat as well, including about how in First Nations people engaged in like the data setters, how's it happening on country? Is there an economic development opportunity? Like, it just stems into so many different questions. So everyone, again, just a physical and silent probably from your end, but round of applause for Kyle for the very interesting talk. The slides were perfect, mate. 10 out of 10 for that. So yeah, excellent. I would now like to, in addition to Kyle, who you've just met, introduce our two other panel speakers. So Dr. Kristen Moeller-Saxone, who is the data capability lead at Infoxchange. Kristen, welcome so much. Thank you for joining us. Did you want to just spend 30 seconds, say, for example, telling us about, a little bit about you or a little bit about the report and the work in which you do?
Great, yes. Thanks so much, Michelle. And just acknowledging too that I'm coming from the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. And yeah, really thrilled by this report by Kyle too, that I think it just ticks so many boxes, and a lot of it being really practical. And I think that's what we're really hungry for. Our work at Infoxchange is about building data capability for organisations, and recognising that data is really the foundations of AI. That yes, look, you need your AI capability, and that's something we also work on. But our work in the Data Catalyst Network is about bringing not-for-profits together and being able to help them build their data knowledge, their skills, and their strengths, so that they can be ready for the AI solutions that they want to build.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we also are joined by Professor Peter Radoll, who's the Director of Radoll and Associates and also Tour Board Director at a large not-for-profit, the Smith family. So Peter, welcome and thank you also for joining. I was just wondering if you would also like to take the next 30 seconds to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michelle. So I'm Peter Radoll. I'm an N1 man, Northern New South Wales. I am coming from Wurundjeri country here in Melbourne today. I'm, run my own consulting business now. I've sort of stepped out of universities, but I'm a non-executive director both on the Smith family and the Victorian Chamber of Commerce. So I get to see the non-for-profit side, and I also get to see the economic engine of Victoria as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we'll bring Kyle up to screen as well. So I do have the pleasure of facilitating a great conversation between the four of you today. And I think, at the beginning, I think Kyle actually put a challenge to all of us thinking about all of this and the overwhelming feeling as well. And so I think I said that I'll do this as the third question, but I'm actually going to start there because that's where Kyle started, this kind of overwhelm, and the feeling that could actually bring when thinking about this. And even now, I think we had Todd from the chat in the Q&A function talking about, speed and pace, which can often lead to that overwhelm. So I might just start with Kristen first and actually go to you to think about and that not-for-profit space where a lot of us, are sitting, not-for-profit in terms of large-scale social systems and things like that, but also to local Aboriginal community-controlled organisations and all those spectrums in between. So I'm just wondering if you're also too feeling in yourself or seeing that uncertainty and that overwhelm coming through, and whether your work in what's, in data capability and inclusion, what practical challenges do you see organisations actually struggle with when it comes to AI and responsibility?
Sure. Thanks, Michelle. Yes, we do see organisations really grappling with these issues. And oftentimes I think because it's moving fast and because it's complex, people, and I think people are seeing the opportunities in this as well too, to be fair. It's not just a pressure, it is a real sort of desire to embrace the opportunities that AI presents. But oftentimes then what happens is people are jumping into tools really first. They're sort of a little bit sort of focused on the solution before they have worked through some of the issues around what are the decisions that they want AI to help them with, or what are some of the service outcomes they're trying to achieve. And, this is the thing to remember, AI is your technique, it's not your strategy. And, sometimes one of the most frustrating things about this is that the solutions can feel a little bit boring because it's about getting your AI policies ready first. The people will come to us going, all right, how can we sort of, use AI? And we'll say to them, okay, so what's your AI policy? What's your organisation thinking about what you want to do? And so many of them will turn back to us and go, yeah, we haven't done that bit yet because it feels like the boring work. And yet the policy can help you surface really important stuff like the use of shadow AI. That lots of people in their organisations, because they're using AI at home, they're using ChatGPT for stuff in their personal lives, know how powerful it is. And so they're getting it to solve their work problems for them just quietly, at work. And workplaces, organisations need to know about this stuff and they need to be able to have a policy to handle it. And, each organisation needs to think about their own context. Is it about pausing? Is it about accelerating? What is it that they need to do? I love the model you've got there, Kyle, for thinking about that stuff. And as you're talking, Kyle, too, I was thinking about, for example, these issues around starting the conversations with your beneficiaries and with your partners about ethics, about data. And so, for example, I saw this morning in my feeds, it might be that your organisation's got your part of the world locked you know, or in shape. But I saw in the feeds this morning how New South Wales Police are setting up their AI centre, and they're hiring their manager, and their first focus is on risk and governance. And I want to commend them for that. I have no specific insights into New South Wales Police. I want to say that from the outside. But we want all not-for-profits to start with our AI policy, and perhaps they also need to be aware of the organisations they're dealing with. You know, you were talking, Kyle, about how we need to pause on some of these things around justice and policing. Well, if you're dealing with an entity like New South Wales Police, what are they doing? You know, how can you check whether they've got their policies in place? So that's one point. If I can just quickly move into the other one, and they're kind of all fed into each other, people have got a lot of AI energy, but have they done their governance? And is their data ready? Because AI is all built on data, and if your data is all just general population data and you haven't got really good quality data around Indigenous communities, then your AI is going to be off. And finally, it's your point about capability and access and how totally uneven they are. And this is why I think, you know, out in other sectors, they've got huge resources, huge access to the benefits of AI, but they don't have huge resources and access to, say, Indigenous data and Indigenous communities. And so they're going to produce solutions that are not right for those communities. You know, some of the stuff that we're doing at Infoxchange is trying to increase the resources of Indigenous organisations and communities through AI support, through data support, so that we can try to level out that playing field. But be aware of where you're at as an organisation in terms of capability and access, and find those resources, get involved with Kyle's project at VU so that you can be a little bit better ready for the AI that you want to do. So hopefully that hasn't taken too long, Michelle.
No, absolutely not. And actually, there's a question on that I'll come to later about that inherently biased data, which was brought up in the chat. But I might just go to Peter next, because Peter, you've got some practical examples of this as a director on a very large and a large footprint, you know, the Smith family, but also to Indigenous employees as well. So did you want to come in on this conversation around that feeling of overwhelm, but also to how might examples, say, for example, to approach this?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, actually, because who doesn't feel overwhelmed with new technology coming at you 100 miles an hour? And understanding what the rules are, really, and how to use the technology. That's the thing I've always struggled with, regardless of the whether it's Napster like 20 or nearly 30 years ago now, or AI. I mean, the concepts are very similar at one fundamental level. I've been on the board of the Smith family now for close to 8 years, and we've got 17,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids in the programs on full scholarship out of the 70,000 odd. So, you know, roughly 20% of kids. And it's hard to deliver good outcomes to all 70,000 kids, and definitely delving into the AI space now to find an appropriate tutor that will engage with students, or students will engage with them. So that's really fascinating. It's only a very small trial at the moment. I'm sure we'll publish it at some point, but it's really, really fascinating to watch, kids engaging with AI, with an AI tutor. And the outcomes are good so far, surprisingly, which is maybe not that surprising, because kids are engaged with digital technology. So maybe that's the way they want to consume knowledge, rather than through a book or through a person at between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's such a good point as well, and also to the different generations. But Kyle, would you like to now come in on some of those conversations?
I've talked a lot already. I want to hear from Kristen, Pete, and you. But I know the work, some of the work that they're doing at the Smith family. I have to be careful about what I say, but they're doing it the right way. They're not bringing solutions in. They're starting from scratch, and they're coming in like, all right, what data do we have? What policies do we have? And what problems do we have? And then they've got an amazing IT company helping them build solutions from thereafter. And I think that's the best approach.
Yeah, it's that traditional thing, and I know that you looked at the closing the gap targets. But really that, traditional call around, the agreement and that before it as well, not just the current one, was work with us, not don't do things to us. And really that's what it's about, right? It's like bringing in, the opportunity to actually design at the forefront. And as you said in there, like not waiting until it's done and then bringing it in and then trying to adapt. And so with that, it actually does bring me to what I was originally going to ask in the first one, because it is such an important question, which is in the First Nations context, and not just that in social constructs, people from culturally and linguistically diverse, people have been probably saying this a lot about the recruitment for example, being, wielded out, because of surnames or whatever that might look like. So, but specifically in a First Nations context, what does genuine decision making, and authority look like? What are examples of those things? And maybe Kyle, given that you've actually looked into those and you have got examples, say for example the cultural mapping and that mapping of land and opportunity, have you seen that in action? What does that look like?
Yes, it's not complicated, and I'll be repeating myself a little bit. Sorry, Shell.
You're right.
Don't come with answers. Listen first. In public health, there's so much transferable learnings. I'll go on a bit of a tangent. The best program I ever worked for was called Deadly Ears. I don't know if you've heard it. It won a lot of awards. We worked with Indigenous kids all over remote Queensland for glue ear, and we eventually started looking at trachoma. But we relied entirely on our reputation. We didn't do any advertising. And word got around through the grapevine, hey, there's this great program down in Brisbane. They'll come up and meet you. We would only do 12 months of consultation, listening, a lot of cups of tea around the tree with the elders, getting to know them before we would even dare to bring an ENT clinic up to meet them. And it's kind of my approach anyway. Maybe I'm wrong, but if I start working with a First Nations, say an Aboriginal medical service, my plan is to come in and just listen first, scope, look at what AI policies, if any, they have, data policies, data types. Is it clean? Is it messy? Is the whole thing a mess? Because there's a lot of work you need to do before you can even consider bringing in an AI solution. So that's generally how I would approach it.
Yeah. And Peter, maybe I'll come to you next. Advice or top tips, I suppose, as well, because there are some practical, both, funders, I'm sure providers and lots of other various people online here listening today. Anything from your perspective around what does this look like in practice as well?
Well, it's tricky, isn't it, Michelle and Kyle and Kristen? The thing I would say, I mean, I'll use my experience creating the official public record for Yuruk here in Victoria. At the State Library, is to ensure that Aboriginal community has control over the decision making rather than any state or government entity. So that's really critical. And that's what we have here in Victoria for the Yuruk public record. It's a digital archive. It has only Aboriginal governance over it. So having Aboriginal governance over those decisions is really critical. And making sure that you have the policies in place to actually embed that, and the legal agreements, which are boring bits, that's for sure, Kristen, but they are the boring bits. But it's important to have those agreements in place before you go do that. But Michelle, if I go on a small tangent here, is one of the things that I do worry about in terms of, Kyle, your report talks about closing the gap, and employment's going to be a real tricky one because there's a large consulting company just took out 200 executive assistant roles out of their business last month, and they're really entry-level roles for anyone who doesn't want to be in a leadership role, but, and of course the important work that executive assistants do, but 200 roles all moved to an AI platform. You have to understand, it's going to have a huge impact on who gets a job or who doesn't. So they're really critical, and that's the thing that worries me about AI.
Who was that, Pete? I reckon they might regret doing that. In Silicon Valley, they let go of tens of thousands of people, and now if you go check on the job adverts, they're hiring a lot of them back because they bought into the AI hype. History shows us that new technologies, the adoption is really incremental and slow, and it's boring if you do it properly. So I would like to, who would which
I'll
consulting
tell
firm
you
was
afterwards. I'll text it to you.
that?
Take that one offline and maybe not for the recording. Yeah. And sorry, Peter, was there?
Yeah, so those entry-level roles are going to be really critical for community, and I know that because spending time, travelling the bush, and my PhD was on the uptake of technology in Aboriginal households in remote, rural, and urban communities. So studied this extensively and lived in community to find out what really goes on. But the truth is, AI is running at a great million miles an hour. It will definitely bring some benefit around health. But the employment is what really distresses me, because all those entry level roles eventually will be impacted by AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things, obviously as well, and Kristen, I might move you into this area of question as well, which is, and given obviously Infoxchange works a lot with the not-for-profit sector and also to those services to really think about how it could actually help and assist in relation to addressing some of those levers of disadvantage that we see in our country. If an organisation, or what have you seen, like that could be, say, for example, like a concrete principle or safeguard that you would, would insist on from the outset when thinking about this and when it contributes towards, those social level outcomes?
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, perhaps if I just follow on from those issues around employment, that I think we're in a really extraordinary transitional time with this, and young people, I think, are very digital native, aren't they, in terms of being able to embrace these things. And so, for example, one of the not-for-profits that we spoke to were looking at how they're using chatbots around alcohol and drug queries. They're in that sector, and the demographic that uses the chatbot most are the young ones, right? So I think that in many ways those young people are already got the skill sets and they've got the mindsets to be able to embrace what are going to be the new roles that are going to be coming forward for them. That said, there's often winners and losers in transitions, and perhaps if I can draw on a little anecdote, I like the comparisons between AI and the advent and rollout of electricity. And I think there'd be very few people today who'd say electricity is bad and we should go back. But we also know that when Nikola Tesla, the guy who was doing a lot of that work on setting up the infrastructure and being able to make it possible on a broad basis, he had the capacity and the vision to create a system that was free, where anybody could access electricity. But because he was being bankrolled by people like Westinghouse, by the bankers and the businessmen, they saw the profit possibilities in electricity and they shut it down, right? So we still, 100 years later, can't get access to free electricity. I think the parallel's really nice with AI. And so really to come back kind of to that one safeguard, I think this is kind of your sort of rule of thumb with AI, is it's all about the human in the loop. That AI should never be allowed. It was, your example of robo-debt. It was the way in which perhaps it's also not just the human in the loop, but which humans, that we had the wrong humans perhaps with robo-debt. And so this comes back to community. And this comes back to each of us as beneficiaries of services, as stakeholders, as whatever. We've got to take seriously our role as the humans in the AI loop and step up and know what data is being held about us, what are organisations doing, whether it's a not-for-profit or whether it's a government instrumentality, what are they doing with our data and how are they reporting back to us? Because they've got a responsibility of reciprocity. If they're benefiting in any way from this data, then they've got to share that benefit. So if I can say one thing here, it's all about be the human in the loop or bring the human in the loop if you've got a tech role in the system, and that's your solution.
Absolutely, as well. And I know that there was, a brief discussion, I'm not sure a question, but around biased data sets. And so where do we find the data sets that are actually developed for and by Indigenous people? Is it the right questions that we're asking? And I don't know if we've got an example of this around the table. Does anyone here, maybe just a physical hand, Kyle, Peter, Kristen, do we have an example of where Indigenous data sets are actually being utilised where there is no bias, or are we actually seeing more and more bias because a lot of the data is actually held about us instead of by us? Not an easy question, and I know this, sorry, but so...
The only one I would point to would be Ray Lovett at the ANU, who actually...
case study.
He'd be a really great case study, because he's the one that sort of changed my thinking a little bit, rather than comparing Indigenous, non-Indigenous forever, is that we need our own benchmarks that are not biased, and then we can measure against ourselves and see if there's improvement. So I like that. I like that thinking.
Absolutely. Kyle?
I went to uni with Ray. We did our masters and PhDs together. He was talking about doing that national survey back then. He wanted he was a really a trailblazer. I've got to give him a call and give him credit. But he wanted to look at the impact of identity on your well-being, and like the impact of being on country or culture and how it affects your health. And he used to talk about collecting national survey data. He wanted to use, I think, Medicare or ABS or something. And then he went off and bloody did it. And now he's got this beautiful data set. He's replenishing it all the time. So that's a great example, Peter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know here as well, someone's mentioned C as well. And yes, they are. They're working, I know, for example, they're working with Marinuka in relation to community level data. And so we do have examples of they're out there, but that doesn't mean that they're inherent or that they're actually systematic as well in their approaches. And so there is that. In saying all that, we're coming to very, very close to the end of this, and I don't want to leave, too much time because thank yous are always just inherent in everything in which we do, and I'm, just so thankful that the three of you are here. Maybe what I could do is just open with one last question about what is your vision for a future that's an AI future, for example, that includes First Nations voices, that is designed by First Nations peoples and for First Nations, outcomes. Do you see a future like that, or what does that vision look like? It's a very big one, so I'm happy for you to just sit on it for 10 seconds. I'll waste a bit of time, and then maybe I'm going to throw to Kristen first, and I hate to do that. I'm so sorry, but I have to dob someone in. Kristen, what does that future look like, or could it be achieved?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just don't think it's a negotiable, actually. I think we've got to own this future. I think we've got to take charge of it. We're working with some great organisations who are doing really practical stuff to make sure that they do take charge of it. So we've got lovely data inventory tools that adhere to care principles, for example, that we're working with some. We're seeing people set up data lakes, Indigenous data lakes, so that they can maintain that control over who's getting access to their data. And I think those organisations are the future, and let's keep encouraging more of those initiatives.
Right, thank you. Peter?
Well, I joined the Chamber of Commerce board to try and generate wealth and get understand how business works at the state and local level, I guess. Look, I have a aspiration, and I've always had that. My motivation for my PhD back in the day was to create an e-commerce model of economic development for remote Aboriginal communities. That's stayed with me. I haven't left that. And I think if AI can produce that in a quicker, more fashionable form, I'd be really happy to see something like that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Kyle, I know that I've got you for the very last words here today, and to say thank you for...
I didn't prepare anything.
So I know, but in saying that, I think your three core takeaways are probably the one thing that will stick with us. And as I said, we'll put this through, but if I could summarise them really quickly: more funding, obviously, and don't forget about the funding for the foundational things. It can't be just funding straight to the top for the high level. It's got to be actually about building it from the, things like digital capability from the ground up. The contracts question is such a great example. So for everyone there, really think about that and utilising contracts and termination clauses where it does not align to cultural values, or, if it's misaligned within that, and the considerations that we all have. And then the third, which is, let us define it, set the boundaries. We want to be involved from the beginning and not the end. So in addition to those three things we've actually preparing, is there anything else that you would like to say before we wind up?
Nothing gets past you. I reckon you've got a photographic memory. You've done that so many times. No, I'll just reiterate, I want to work with First Nations organisations, people that are writing the policies. So please, I left my email in the chat. I need help. I need partners. So please reach out. And thank you so much for everyone for joining and listening.
Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you joining here today. I cannot say enough that the future of this is bright with people like Kyle at the forehead, but same as like the future is great when we can have our combined and collective efforts like the panel here today, thinking and talking about these things rather than it just being a single-sided conversation. So thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Kristen. Our partnerships in different ways mean a lot to us, and just cannot thank everyone. Over 145, I think, at the highest here today.
Wow.
So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.